Hello, everyone, and welcome to Undergraduate Research Week. So this panel is run by the Undergraduate Science Journal, which is a student-run organization where we review and edit incoming basically undergraduate papers in the life and physical sciences. And so this panel will specifically focus on the undergraduate writing experience. So publishing a paper, writing a paper, and going through USJ. All of these panelists are writers who have submitted to USJ in the past year, and we'll just talk a little bit about the writing process and how it went for them. So yeah. So the first question in the panel will be introduce yourself. So you can talk about, I guess, your name, major, the lab you're working with, just anything you feel is relevant in this situation. Yeah. So feel free to unmute.
Oh, hello. My name is Elizabeth. I am a third year chemical engineering undergrad. So currently I'm involved in Professor Young's group. My research is on whole transporting material for perovskite solar cells. And I am also currently working on another project in the same group, just a new project that's getting started on bioorganic framework for like drug delivery systems. I'm also in another lab for Professor Yuzhang Li's lab in the chemical engineering department working on lithium metal batteries. More specifically, I look at the effects of corrosion over time. So like calendar aging in lithium metal batteries.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa. I'm a fourth year geology major, and for the past year and a half, I've been working on a paleoclimate, paleohydrology project based in the southwestern United States. And I work with Dr. Aradhana Tripathi and her group, the Climate and Biogeochemistry group in EPSS. And what we do is that we look at carbonate lake sediments in the field, and then we collect them and do clumped isotope thermometry on them and isotopic mass balance modeling to kind of understand the water balance of the Southwest during a time where we had a lot of ice sheets, which was called the last glacial maximum, which was about 20,000 years ago. So we're trying to kind of constrain what mechanisms were influencing that region and what led to the present day aridity.
Sure, I guess I'll go next. Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Tang. I'm also a third year chemical engineering major. My interests in research include sustainability, electrochemistry, energy-based technologies. I'm affiliated with Professor Yunfeng Liu's group. My project there was to research novel cathode alternative materials to more traditional cobalt-based batteries, especially those with metal fluorides. I now am a little more affiliated with Professor Yuzhang Li's group, just like Elizabeth. My project is more focused on chemical simulations of novel electrogeometries, but also working on more new topic in the battery field, recycling lithium batteries. Very, very cool. But for USJ at least, my work was in neither of those two groups. It was actually Professor Greer groups at Caltech, where I was also in charge of chemical simulations based on the porous electric theory for novel electric architectures. Oh, sorry, did I freeze or?
Nope, all good. And then Ivan, if you want to go.
Hi everyone. I'm Ivan, he, him. I'm a fourth year MIMG major, and I have been part of Dr. Alyssa Hallam's lab in the MIMG department for about 3 years now. We are a parasitology/neurobiology lab, so we are broadly concerned with chemosensory behaviors and chemosensory neural circuits in skin penetrating parasitic nematodes. Specifically, my project is looking at how these skin penetrating parasites interact with various types of environmental and host associated bacteria, specifically at different points in their life cycle, because the parasites we work with have a really interesting life cycle that includes both a parasitic generation and non-parasitic generation. So my project is trying to understand how those sort of different life stages react to different types of bacteria.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so our next question will be kind of related to this topic, or like the topic of introducing ourselves. So tell us a little bit more about the science behind your own research paper, so the paper that you submitted to USJ. So feel free to talk about like methodology, frame the paper, anything like that. We can go in reverse order this time, so starting with Ivan.
Yeah, so as I sort of kind of briefly touched on, I'm looking at skin penetrating parasitic nematodes. So this is the genus of Strongyloides, right? And so I'm really interested in understanding how these parasites are interacting with their microbial environments. So that's specifically their bacterial environments, because these parasites are in host feces, they are in the soil when they're trying to find a host, they're finding the skin of the host, penetrating the host, then they get inside the host. So all these different environments have different bacteria that are commonly found in them. So I'm trying to understand how is it that the different life stages actually produce very specific responses to those different types of bacteria. So the way I've sort of been approaching this is generally using population-based chemotaxis assays so that we can sort of understand the valence of their actual response, whether they're attracted to it or if they're repelled by it. Additionally, we've also looked at we've done some videographic analysis. So that's like single worm tracking. So we can understand the nuanced sort of behavior that the worm sort of employs to either get to a bacterium or move away from the bacterium, and what that can tell us about perhaps what neural circuits that are being employed. And that sort of part of understanding the neural basis of these very life stage specific behaviors is going to be the sort of next part of my project that I'm going to be working on for my GAP.
Yeah, so it's interesting because my project was given an off-campus project. So it was I had maybe 10, 15 weeks over the summer to do it. So a little bit of a condense of a time frame. The methodology for my project was that electrical engineering has advanced for the past few decades for lithium batteries. And there's a certain set of architecture parameters. So for example, how porous the architecture for a lithium battery is, so it's called porosity, or how lined the transport channels in the battery, in the architecture is, that's called porosity, or how much active material you put in this architecture, that's your active material fraction. And there's a range of parameters for each of these architectures from the literature that we collected for our project. Then using those range of parameters, simulating them in COMSOL, electrochemical simulation software based on transport, to really predict the performance parameters of various batteries. So you inputting these parameters, when a simulation run, you can produce a voltage versus capacity profile, and that can predict, okay, how much capacity can one cell have at a certain C rate, or how much energy density or how much power density can this battery have. So really gives us an understanding of which architectures are more optimized for certain parameters. So in my project, I think there were 3 architectures focused on more traditional slurry-based batteries, and then there was some using alignment, so maybe through a magnetic field or through a nice template, those are called particle-aligned slurries. And we also used, simulated a newer architecture, actually pioneered by my graduate student mentor, Kai Narita at Caltech, direct light processing, 3D printed electric cathode. So using 3D printing and a photopolymer resin to really control the electric parameters more thoroughly involved in the cycling process.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so my project is a like a smaller portion of a larger suite of what we basically look at lakes. And so my lake that I was looking at is in Southeast Arizona. However, like I mentioned, we're looking at a whole suite of lakes in the Western United States. So essentially in states like California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Utah. And so as we know right now, this region is really water sensitive and very dry. But during the LGM, which was 20,000 years ago, it was the region was really wet, so a lot of precipitation was coming in, and it was also really cold because we had the maximum extent of the ice sheets. So it was during the last ice age. And so what I've done is we went out into the field and collected samples, basically we mapped the shoreline of the basin of the lake in Arizona, and we collected gastropod shells, and we also collected cements, which are just like carbonate, like different types of rocks. And what we do is we took them back into the lab and we drilled them, crushed them into fine powder, and then we also cleaned them out using a different variety of chemicals. And then what we did is that we weighed them into little capsules. So we essentially then put them into our mass spectrometer, which is specifically looking at clumped isotopes. And clumped isotopes are really interesting to us because they're thermodynamically like related to, they're basically thermodynamically controlled, and they're related to the formation temperature of that carbonate, which is CaCO3. It's a mineral. And so that thermodynamic constraint allows us to calculate the isotopic signature of the source water, so we can kind of backtrack what the lake was doing over time. And we also radiocarbon dated them. We sent them out to UC Irvine to get age constraints. And so after we get like all of our isotopic measurements in our lab, we do a lot of calibrations, and we then do a lot of use a different functions and equations to estimate the precipitation and evaporation that would have occurred during that time. Yeah, and essentially we're motivated by the questions such as like what caused the Western United States during the LGM to be substantially wetter than today? How did the lake called Paleo Lake Cochise respond to climatological forcings over time? And then what mechanisms drove those changes? I'll be working on sort of like this project, but in a different time period in grad school next year. So I'm kind of looking at a period of time that was about 2 million years ago instead of 20,000 years ago. So it gets a little bit more difficult, but that time, the Pliocene is what I'll be looking at afterwards. And it's a time where it was really warm, and the lake level, the sea level rise was about what we're at right now. And the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is also similar to what we have today. So we kind of use it as a analog for the future. So I'm excited to be looking at just lakes, but in a different time period in the future.
Cool. So my paper is actually a review paper on third generation photovoltaics. I got this idea actually based on what I've been working on in the lab. So like I mentioned a little earlier, I work on whole transporting materials for specifically perovskite solar cells, but there are many other solar cells out there, such as dye-sensitized solar cells, organic solar cells, and perovskite solar cells is one of actually the most promising because the power conversion efficiency improved from about 3% in like 2006 to over 25% these days. But stability is one of the big issues because with the perovskite solar cells, it's actually very vulnerable to moisture. So once you expose it to just a regular environment, then it degrades very fast. So working on this whole transporting material, whole transporting layer is actually one way that we are looking at to improve the long-term stability. So for whole transporting material, I'm personally working on small molecular designs. So we synthesize these molecules in lab. Basically, we first design a molecule. There are different like end capping groups. Now we have different core structures, looking at different morphology that can lead to like different whole mobilities, as well as the crystallinity, the packing structure, that can all influence the overall performance of this material. So after we've designed a molecule, usually we run like a simulation to predict how well this molecular design is going to work. And then we go ahead and synthesize our molecule. So since this is not a purely chemistry lab, a majority of our synthesis procedures, synthesis methods are just by looking at other researches that has been done on like, how do you synthesize this molecule? Obviously the molecule design is completely new, but we borrow like other synthesis methods and we try them in our lab to see if it works. And so yeah, so it just involves the usual organic synthesis procedures like carrying out the reaction under nitrogen atmosphere and then purifying it through extraction, column chromatography, and then we test if we actually got the compound through NMR, mass spec, things like that. And then after we synthesize the whole transporting material, we would then deposit spin code this on the perovskite solar cell on the device. And then there are a lot of things to optimize, including things like how much you want to add, how thick you want the layer to be. Solubility is another thing to that we really focus on when we are designing this molecule. We don't want it to be, we don't want the solubility to be too low in the common organic solvents. So that's another thing to consider. What else? Right, and then we test our device under high temperature to see the thermal stability as well as just general long-term stability. And oh, another thing is with these synthesized whole transporting material, we also examine the role of dopants. So usually we add these dopants to improve the charge transport. So in our lab, we're actually working on looking at organic dopants instead of inorganic dopants. So a lot of the perovskite solar cells, they use inorganic dopants like LiTFSI, but these kind of inorganic dopants are very vulnerable to moisture, and that brings down the stability of the device. So we're also looking at including these organic dopants to our design so that can improve our stability. I think we're also trying to synthesize some dopant-free designs where it doesn't require any dopants. So yeah, that's another, I think, a future direction that we want to go to.
Thank you guys so much for all those answers. To introduce myself, I'm Sophia. I'm one of the assistant managing editors for editorial board. So nice to meet you guys. So the next question is describe your writing process. So when did you start writing the paper that you submitted for USJ, and in general, how did you approach it? And so I guess to follow the pattern, we can start with Elizabeth and then go backwards if everyone's okay with that.
Cool. So for my paper, I actually started writing it around, so the middle of fall quarter. Yeah, around that time. So it's a review paper. So it definitely requires a lot of browsing through the literature, trying to organize, trying to make an outline. So I think reading other review papers is definitely one way to start to get an idea of how I want to organize my review paper? How do I want to get my point across? So I started off reading a lot of other review papers just because also since I'm writing about all the third generation photovoltaic devices, although my expert is more in like just perovskite solar cells, so I actually did have to do a lot of research on like the dye-sensitized solar cells and the organic solar cell that I also included in the paper. So and then after getting a general idea, I made an outline for my paper with specific things that I want to highlight, and then expanding that outline to include specific papers, specific research that has been done to improve the solar cell, to improve the device. And I would say definitely it went from a very general topic of what I want to cover to specific things, to like individual individual research paper, what's been done for each device. So also in writing the paper, it's a little intimidating writing a huge review paper. But definitely what helped is setting goals for what I want to accomplish each week. So then it doesn't seem too overwhelming just because I guess each goal that I set for myself is very doable. So then, and then they add up. So yeah, that's my writing process.
Yeah, so last year, I'm in the camp program. So it's like an NSF funded program through the Undergraduate Research Center. And they've been really helpful just supporting all of like their students to kind of write a research paper. So before even thinking about submitting my original research to the USJ, I kind of had a working draft of it last year, like just a working draft of everything that I wanted to do and write in the paper that I would eventually submit to the USJ. However, I guess, yeah, they helped me break it up. So I kind of had an abstract, an introduction, and I would work on each section at a different quarter. But since I had like quite a bit of time to think about the research that I've been doing, I was able to do that. But I sat down with my advisor before that, like at the beginning, to kind of make a plan and kind of schedule meetings and also send drafts back and forth to get feedback on them. But I started with an introduction and a just like the main chunk of the paper. But before that, I also did a lot of reading, kind of getting familiar with the literature in my field, because it was the first time I was doing research. So I got familiar with a lot of the papers that we use in the lab. A lot of them have been published by previous grad students that have been really helpful in the writing process for me and just giving me advice. And after kind of getting familiar with a lot of the literature, I like I mentioned, I wrote an intro, a methods. Then I was also getting familiar with a lot of the techniques we were using. So we were using RStudio to do statistics on all of our for our data. And after kind of getting all of the data situated, I was able to plot things on different softwares. So I was also learning how to use different softwares. And after everything was plotted and I was kind of making a working figure and sort of just seeing like what my results are saying, that's when I was able to piece things together and be able to write a discussion and be able to describe my results in an effective way, in an efficient way. So, and then I would eventually write the conclusion. And after that was done, it went through a bunch of different revisions, sending it back and forth to a bunch of collaborators because it it was very much a collaborative endeavor. There were so many people involved in the project, sample collection and just supporting in different aspects. Like we had dynamicists, geochemists, so we all kind of had to work together to come to our conclusions.
Sometimes the unmute feature isn't too kind to me. Okay. Yeah. So I guess when I heard about the opportunity to publish in USJ, I didn't have to quite start from scratch, completely scratch. I had a existing manuscript for my project that I was required to write anyways for the funding I received from the off-campus opportunity, which is called SURF, by the way, Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship at Caltech. So I guess I can talk a little bit more how I started with that initial manuscript before going through the USJ review process. So after some weeks in, I think it was around week 8 of like a 10-week project, you have to start writing your manuscript. And I think the advice I was given and what I kind of followed through was always start with the figures and the results, because that's where your story begins. The plots, oh, sorry, nope. Okay, cool. Yeah, the figures, the plots, the graphs, I'll tell you the story. So especially for simulation software and batteries, you're simulating voltage Cassie profiles. In my case, you had like the effects of 3 different parameters. So it'd be like a 3D plot with like color as like the dependent variable and 3 independent variables. So making sure those are all in order. That's where I started first. Remember, a lot of many hours manipulating the MATLAB graph interface. That was a lot of fun. Then after you get your figures down, and then you can start writing another discussion. What can the results tell us? Really getting into the heart of that, behind the theory kind of science. And then following your background, introduction, and conclusion should follow after that, I feel. And I remember a lot of my process. It was my first time, really drafting a scientific manuscript. Prior to the opportunity, I've done research, as an undergrad at UCLA, and a lot of thinking, it can be done by a graduate student, right? That's how you start off. So, you're writing down, same with the manuscript, sort of really going through and like writing down what happened and getting feedback from, your mentors, your graduate student mentors, your professor, your advisor. That was very helpful too. So I had that initial manuscript. I thought for USJ, I saw you could submit, that existing manuscript to the journal. I was like, okay, piece of cake. I'm gonna submit this manuscript. It's great already. I just need to, change, update the data that we've been finishing on. By that, I think January 7th deadline it was. You submit your review. Correct me if I'm wrong, but put that in. Not the case. A lot back and forth through that review process. I remember the letter Jiho sent me. I was like, wow, this is quite a bit of feedback. Very, very good. And going back and forth with her and Caroline, the editor I worked with specifically. Edits here and there. I think the hardest part in this revision process was balancing with school. I can only imagine what the editors were going through. Me, I thought, wow, responding to these edits is quite a bit of work already, but what the editors had to go through. I see James smiling. Yeah, quite a bit of back and forth. So I'm very grateful for that. Have to acknowledge all those who helped with that review process. And I think the other panelists here, they've pointed to making a goal, making plans. Totally agree. Very, very helpful to set progress checks. And I can't emphasize enough the feedback we have to give, because let's face it, we're undergraduate students. Our graduate student peers, our postdocs, the professors we work with, they've had a lot of experience with scientific writing, scientific creation. So making sure you listen to them, absorb their feedback as much as you can, and apply that to your manuscript.
Yeah, so my sort of, I guess, story in getting what I eventually submitted really started when I first joined my lab during my second year. And so basically the pattern for me was that because I was in a lot of like programs that, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the program required some written form of like some written report, essentially. I've essentially just kept on revising that, and eventually it turned into the manuscript I submitted. So like at the end of, I want to say my second year, I was in, I think it's the Care Fellows or Care Scholars. And for that, you had to write like an intro, an abstract, and your methods. And so that's how I started. I started with basically the methods because that's really easy. And then I sort of did the introduction. And for that, what really helped was the fact that I was getting started in the research, getting sort of familiar with the background of literature. And so that really helped me shape a sort of introduction. It was very long and it was not that great because it was the first time I've done it. But to echo what Brandon said, I definitely sent it to my grad student mentor. And like when I got it back, it was like almost completely in red for track changes. But I mean, like all the changes made it so much better. It was completely rearranged. So I definitely think that like reaching out to your mentors, other people in lab who have a lot more experience to get feedback on it is definitely an integral part of sort of making each section by itself like better. And then I've also sort of done other programs and like SFP and stuff like that, that again require written proof that you've done the program. So basically every quarter I would just resubmit it and resubmit with new data, updated figures, and sort of just expanded sections. And so really, I think the most work was done this previous summer, because that was when we were sort of we were also preparing our sort of like main actual manuscript that we were going to submit. So I used that preparation working directly with my faculty mentor advisor and use that to actually sort of update my thesis so that it could be sort of, better, make sure the results section was actually sort of making sense and contextualizing our data, which I find is one of the hardest parts, where it's like, you want to give your results sections, like, just talk about the data, but also you can't just talk about the data. I feel like you also need some context there. And then at the very end of it is actually when I wrote the discussion section. So that was over the summer, and that was by far personally the hardest part of it for me, just because it's sort of like, how does this fit into your broader sort of field, which I think is sort of hard to get a sense when you haven't been doing this for so long. But again, my advisor was definitely a huge help with getting that work together. And finally, when I submitted what is essentially my thesis to USJ, my editor, Layla, really gave me a lot of feedback on how to structure sentences and sort of your points for clarity, because I feel like that's one of the biggest things that as authors, when you're familiar with your research, you say something and it makes perfect sense to you, but when someone else outside your field reads that, they're like, this makes no sense. So I think that was one of the biggest helps that the editors and reviewers gave me to improve my manuscript.
Okay, so I guess I'll introduce myself first. Hi, I'm Jasmine. I'm the other AME of the editorial board. And the next question I have for you is, what was your biggest challenge, either in the writing or editing/review process? And we could go back in the same reverse order as well.
Yeah, so I would definitely say editing and reviewing, the biggest challenge was definitely figuring out how to get your point across in a way that sort of makes sense, in a very like clear way that people outside your field would understand. It would make sense. Also, a lot of times when you have like research classes, your actual research, or when you're writing up reports for like other things that are related to your research, a lot of the times it can be difficult to both synthesize feedback you get on different aspects, different like types of reports into your actual manuscript, but also keep them separate. So it was a bit of a to figure out what was going to go into my USJ submission and how that was separate from our sort of like our lab's main manuscript. So I think it's really important and challenging to figure out what is your subset of like the larger project, and how are you going to spin that into a full story that makes sense for a reader in the USJ.
Yeah, I had to say the biggest
challenge for me was time management. I think writing any manuscript takes a lot of time, and going through the revision process takes a lot of time. The editors, I have to really acknowledge them for their patience. I think there are a couple times I was rather close to the deadline. I am sure I may have stressed them out a little bit too much, but definitely appreciate the grace they've given. Setting goals for yourself is important because writing manuscript itself. I mean, writing. I feel that when you have a lot of time, it seems less daunting than if you're doing things to the last minute, right? And we're students too, right? So you have to balance your class responsibilities. You're probably in a research lab. You're just going to the USJ, so managing those new research opportunities as well. You have your extracurriculars to worry about. You have a life outside of school and research. So juggling all those responsibilities, I feel, is not only it's particularly important or particularly relevant to the review process. I think, and frankly, all of college life and all of adult life really is organizing yourselves and making sure that your responsibilities are all in order in a timely fashion. I certainly felt the time pressure sometimes with USJ. And I feel it's important to ask for those extensions or accommodations if you need them, right? I think we're all students, we're all humans, we understand that process, and don't feel shy about reaching out for help, really, because editors are there to help you. This is not for a grade. It's extracurriculars. Make sure that you do it for your own learning and your own growth, and keep up to date with your Google Calendar. That's all I have to say. Yeah.
So some things I struggled with was definitely like with the pandemic, a lot of the research, well, thankfully I had a lot of preliminary data before the pandemic and the shutdown. So in that sense, it didn't affect me very much, but I really missed out on that collaborative effort with the people in my lab. I feel like that connection really strengthens your research and like how you communicate your research outside. And also to echo off what Ivan said, learning how to communicate your research to folks inside your field is a little bit challenging. So kind of finding your target audience, especially because this is an undergraduate science journal. Undergraduates are going to be reading this, but also professors might be reading this. So you kind of need to find like a balance between how specific and how, like, I guess a little bit downgraded you want to approach it. Also time management, like everybody mentioned, we're students. It's difficult to keep up with all your classes, and I'm going to be graduating this year, so it's kind of getting to that end line, and kind of staying motivated has been really difficult with the pandemic. So just being on top of my calendar and all of my sticky notes, just writing everything down has been really important. But yeah, definitely a challenge with this day and age, but we're all going through it, so it's understandable.
Yeah, and for me, I think writing a review paper, especially the most difficult part, is developing the logic flow and being able to connect all these papers together. Because if you just read each individual paper, they talk about very different stuff. The things that they want to highlight in the paper is probably, or it may not be what you want to highlight in your review paper sometimes, because they don't always talk about the same stuff. So actually, before submitting this review manuscript for USJ, I've been working on another review paper that our group is trying to submit to actual journal. So that sort of helped me just to get more experienced in reading papers in general, finding what I need to find in those papers very quickly. So, but again, it's still very difficult, I think, just browsing through hundreds of papers, trying to get the main points, trying to understand what's going on. Sometimes some papers, it's very difficult because they don't explain too much the concepts behind their data. Some other papers can be very helpful. So it's just really being able to understand their reasonings, being able to understand what this paper is really showing, or I guess what are the takeaways from like each paper, and then just organizing that and forming that into a review paper that have the proper logic flow, that when a reader reads it, that actually makes sense to them, not just like listing a bunch of data. So I would say that's the most difficult part, and I think that's the part I would need the most help and support on. My postdoc has been a very good resource when it comes to this, just because I'm not the most familiar with the field in terms of data analysis. Some of the analysis techniques, I'm a little, I'm definitely not the most experienced in interpreting the data. So yeah, I think reaching out to people definitely can help. But overall, I would just say that when it comes to review paper, organize the thoughts, and having your own understanding is the most difficult, but the most important as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for all those lovely responses. Our next question will be more focused on the publishing process. So I think all of you have published in the USJ so far, but if you've also published in another journal, feel free to talk about that. So how was that like? How was the review editing process? Were there any, any difficulties with, publishing for USJ or publishing for another journal, that type of thing? So feel free to, anything related to that. So we can go from Elizabeth now.
So for publishing for USJ, I think the editorial team definitely was very, very helpful. I think they gave me some really constructive feedbacks the first time, because in my review paper, when I was reading it, it sounded fine, but then for someone who don't necessarily have the background, a lot of the terms didn't make sense to them. So it's really important to build that background. So I really appreciate the feedback. And I think the editors worked definitely really hard, especially I think for my paper, it's pretty long because it's a review paper, and they really went through the paper sentence by sentence, and we worked on this for a long time. So I really appreciate Lisa, right? That's my editor. Really appreciate her help. And in terms of publishing on other journals, I did mention the review paper that I was writing. It's actually a review paper we're trying to publish on Nature Review Chemistry. So we started writing that review paper around spring quarter of last year, and and I guess not that many people were involved in writing that review paper, and I was given a big portion of it that I was expected to write, and that was actually very difficult because I was a sophomore at that time, and I actually didn't have much experience when it comes to literature review and just writing research paper in general. So it was pretty difficult, but we went through a couple edits, and when we got it back, actually, it was for a major revision, as I expected. So we did have to change a lot of things, and we're still changing it up right now. And just because I think the bar is very high when it comes to Nature Review Chemistry, they definitely want a lot of your insight into the paper. So it's definitely a learning process for me. And overall, that publishing process wasn't the most smooth, but I would say I learned a lot from that. And for, I guess for some other publications that I was involved in, I was mostly involved in the experimental part, so I can't say too much about the actual um, publishing process, right? But I would imagine there is a lot of going back and forth that is expected. So I would say just never be discouraged by that. It's very helpful. I think it's also good to know what you need to improve on. And
So for USJ, I actually had a lot of fun working with my editors, Andrew and Alex. Um, it was a big undertaking for them, I would say, or anybody who reads my paper, just because the field is like they're not familiar with what I'm writing about. They were life science majors, and so just getting familiar with it, I kind of commend them for that a lot. And then helping me both in like grammar or just the flow or the structure of my paper. There was kind of a beauty in like tearing your paper apart and then piecing it back together, because you kind of know the ins and outs of it now, and you appreciate your work much more. It's a really cool, fulfilling experience. And I'm currently working on publishing 2 papers with my advisor and other collaborators. So basically, I'm going to take a lot of the text that I've incorporated in the USJ publication to expand on it. So we're adding another basin that we're looking at. It's nearby the basin that I looked at for USJ. And we're kind of expanding the study, and I'm kind of sifting through that data right now and hopefully coming to this similar conclusions. And we're going to hopefully publish that in a geoscience journal. We're not sure which one yet. There's a couple we're thinking about. And while we're thinking about what journal to submit, we're kind of looking at what they require, because each journal has a different way of structuring their papers. And so then you're kind of required to stick by how they want their format to be. And then same with the other paper. They're kind of coming out simultaneously. So I'm kind of meeting with the dynamicists and geochemists and my advisors and everybody pretty often in the week, and just kind of going back and forth to the different projects. But overall, they're very similar. We're just looking at different sites, but at the same time, all these sites are governed by different physics and chemistry. So we're coming to different conclusions, but it's a really cool experience. I'm learning a lot from people from a different field. Like right now I'm studying geology, so I know a lot about the rock, the chemistry, the sites, but I've become more interested in climate and just atmospheric dynamics through that, because I want to kind of expand on, why, like the larger implications of, sure, you have this rock, but like, what does it really mean? And what is it showing you? What is it telling you? So it's a much more interdisciplinary research that I'm doing. And yeah.
Right. USJ, I think, is the first and the only publication process I've really been a part of so far. Yeah, and I think kind of want to echo what Elizabeth and Alexa have already said. Certainly a great learning experience going through this process. Again, back and forth between Caroline, that was the editor I mainly interfaced with. English is my first language, so really, hey, you missed this grammar mistake here. Oh, you missed that there. So just catching all those little errors is like, okay, this is something I really need to work on. Some further insights as well as far as publishing for other journals. I've had peers, colleagues, friends who publish other journals, and I think I do want to share some advice. Some of my mentors have given me when it came to publishing in journals as undergrad. I think often it's easy, and maybe this is not answering the question too much, but I think in academia in general, there's a huge pressure to publish or perish, right? And it sometimes trickles down to undergrads, applying for graduate school too. I think it's also important to realize that publishing in a journal as undergrad, whether it's an undergraduate student journal or a peer, serious peer-reviewed journal as well, a lot of publication, it takes time, right? And it's often as undergrad, you may not get the results or data that you have to publish. So, of course, I encourage everyone to get involved with USJ. It's been a great process for me, great experience. But understand that there's no shame in not having the results or data yet you need to publish, because it's a lot of science is a lot of luck, to be quite frank, right? It's a lot of chance. You may not get the results or data you need, and there's no shame in not getting those tangible results to publish, because after all, going through the process of research, I think, is a much more rewarding experience than just publishing, because science, you may not get those tangible results, but the experience of going through the research process, that is much more valuable than just one publication. Yeah, I'll end it there, because I think I don't want to repeat too much of what the other panelists have said here. I think it would just sound like a broken record, but I just want to offer that little bit of insight I've received myself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what everybody was saying. I think USJ is great because it does give undergraduates an opportunity to go through a formal publishing process. I mean, most undergraduates don't get to publish, right? We don't really get to see this whole process. And to sort of like echo what everybody's been saying, it takes quite some time. Like it takes a lot, like even like for, sorry, it takes a while. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I was just saying that like publishing takes time. So like, yeah. In terms of the process for USJ, I got a lot of like clarifying feedback remarks because, it's obvious to me, but when I say a couple things throughout the paper, but then somebody else looks at it, they're like, this sounds sort of contradictory. And it's like, okay, I should clarify like what this really means. In terms of publishing outside of USJ, I was actually, I'm going to publish in the sort of the whole project in BMC biology, right? So that was really an interesting process because I'm the one that's actually like pulling all the data together and writing the paper. And it's quite the process because you have to take like all of the data and figure out what like maybe another person that did the experiment sort of like was doing and sort of incorporate the methods, the results into like the whole paper. And so it definitely does take time. In terms of submitting to journals, it's an interesting process. I feel like something people don't really talk about is that it takes a long time to like format it correctly for a journal to submit. And so the first journal we submitted to, we were summarily rejected from editorially. So that was oof, but it happens. So we submitted to the second journal and then we are sort of got accepted to that. So one of the sort of, I guess, pieces of advice is like once you start submitting to like academic scientific journals, it might be a good idea to start prepping the sort of layout for another journal in case you like do get rejected, because it does take time. Also, like reviews, like it takes time for like peer reviews to come back. And then what I didn't realize was that the additional experiments that people ask for kind of do take a lot of time. I'm in the midst of sort of like doing the additional experiments that our reviewers asked for. And a lot of the times to a reviewer, it might be like, okay, you can just do this simple thing to add something to your paper. But in reality, because the sort of background and context of your paper, that you have to do like a whole bunch of sort of troubleshooting experiments, evaluating experiments before you can actually get to do what the reviewer wants you to do. So that's currently what I'm doing right now. And this is all just to sort of reemphasize that it takes time. So yeah.
Okay, thank you guys all for sharing all of that wonderful information. We are almost at 1, but we do have one more like wrap-up question. So want to be like respectful of your time. If any of you do need to leave, that is totally okay. But our last question for you guys was about your plans for the future professionally and the directions that you see your research going, or your career as well. So I guess we can start with Ivan again.
Yeah, so originally the plan was to go to graduate school right out of undergrad, but for multiple reasons, that's not going to happen. Firstly, the real reason is because kind of COVID happened and I'm not down with virtual interviews. I am a big believer in the fact that you need to be in a good environment to do your best work. And I feel like I would need to visit a program in a school to really get a sense for that. Another reason is that a lot of people do say that people who take gap years, especially in research, tend to be a little bit more like sure of themselves because they've had that period of time outside of a school, outside of a program to focus on research and come to the conclusion themselves that yes, grad school is what I want to do. So I am going to be taking a gap year, continuing working in the lab that I am now. I have the next steps planned out for my project so that it's fairly easy for me to continue my research. I don't have to join a new lab and spend 6 months learning the sort of techniques and stuff. So that's what I'll be doing. Then I'll apply to grad school next upcoming cycle, hopefully get accepted and go. In terms of more future career goals, not really sure, but I would definitely say maybe the best sort of pie in the sky option is a sort of professorship at an R1 institution like UCLA, or work for like the NIH. That'd be cool too.
Yeah, the quintessential question: what's next, right? So I think for me, I guess like in the near future, I guess this upcoming summer, I'll be working for Pacific Northwest National Laboratories under the Science Undergraduate Laboratory Internship SUI program. I'll be working with Professor Usui, doing electrolyte calculations, solid electrolyte interface modeling for lithium batteries. In terms of after college, industry or grad school, I think I'm still on the fence with that decision. Pursuing a doctorate, of course, is a big commitment. 5 years science or engineering program. So definitely something that's kind of been on my mind, of course, of late. Figuring out, whether I want to, work for a couple of years and come back for a PhD or straight into the PhD program. Certainly love research. Certainly love the field I'm in, energy storage and electrochemical technologies. But I think kind of debating whether to pursue it right out of the gate is kind of where I'm at. Yeah. Right. And I think I've had a lot of mentorship in this area as well, which has been really helpful. Elizabeth and I are in the same lab, so we often do talk about this, which is great. Some other upperclassmen have given me some advice, some pointers to figure it out. Fortunately, I have that last year left. Great to do. Can't wait to go back into the lab. Hopefully, we'll be in person. Get to use my hands for once. I think simulations, modeling is great, but staring at a screen for a long time can be a little tiring at freeze. Oh, sorry. Did I freeze? I'm sorry. Okay, cool. Where did I cut off?
You were talking about how you and Elizabeth are in the same lab. So you talk about, you mentorship a lot, and you've had a lot of mentorship, and that's been helpful. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I think, yes, so my advice is for those who are also on the fence, just like me, reach out to the mentors, the upperclassmen, who've been through that decision before, for both industry, for both grad school, help you make this, more solid decision. And, as a third year, I'm looking forward to hopefully being back in person. One last year of undergraduate research. With Professor Yuzhang Li, in his new lab. So hopefully get my hands dirty. Can't wait. Modeling, simulation, a lot of fun, of course, very rewarding, but I do miss being in the lab, and collaborating face to face. So, right.
So I'm staying at UCLA for grad school. I'm really excited. It was a very difficult application season just because of COVID, finding funding, but I knew for sure I wanted to stay in California and in Southern California specifically. So I looked at schools, but I wanted to make sure that the school that I wanted to go, like the schools that I was going to apply to, were schools that I certainly wanted, like 100% wanted to go if I got funding and admission and all that. And if I found someone that wanted to work with me and was doing the work that I wanted to do. So that narrowed down to about 3 schools. So yeah, and yeah, I did a lot of interviews and just also meetings with people that I wanted to work with. And ultimately, my advisor really wanted to recruit me, even if I wasn't interested in UCLA. So, but I was. So luckily, she was really excited about me staying at UCLA and just expanding more my knowledge and kind of learning more from her and from everybody in our lab group, because it's like an amazing lab group. It's really diverse. And my advisor runs the Center for Diverse Leadership in Science, so we mentor a lot of students, and yeah, that's something that I want to do in the future going forward. My grad student mentor has been amazing to me, and I want to do the same thing for other people. And so I'm getting my PhD at UCLA in atmospheric and oceanic sciences versus doing geochemistry or geology, so moving departments. And I thought this would be a good idea just to become a more well-rounded geoscientist, because I just love Earth and I love all facets of it. So I think getting the atmospheric side under my belt would really help me in the future. And I think our field has a lot of potential going forward. I also think our field, well, there's studies that our field is one of the least diverse in STEM. And so I want to be another voice, another face to kind of improve that diversity in geoscience and support people like me. But, oh, I also, I'm really fortunate enough to have also gotten funding or gotten awarded the National Science Foundation Graduate Student Fellowship this year. So I'm funded for 3 years. And that's another testament to my advisor and my mentors. Writing a proposal was really fun. So I'm actually going to get to do that proposal and expand it in grad school. So like I mentioned sometime in the panel, I'm going to kind of expand my project, kind of like paleoclimate, paleohydrology lakes, but expand it to a different time period and then also spatially. So I'm going to look farther north and farther south, potentially look at lakes in South America and in Australia and in Africa, and hopefully do some field work if the climate allows it. I think UCLA was also the best fit for me in terms of opportunities. So my advisor has this upcoming plan to go to the UK to work with some modelers, work with isotopic enabled climate modelers in Bristol. And so that's going to be a really cool experience aside of geoscience that I haven't been exposed to. So I'm really excited. Yeah.
For me, I'm a third year, so I'm gonna be applying to graduate schools toward the end of this year, fall quarter. So in terms of what specifically I want to do for graduate school, I think since I've been exposed to like solar cells, photovoltaics, as well as lithium batteries. So I think I would be open to both of those. And in terms of choosing graduate school, I think one important factor to consider is definitely the group, the environment, the group environment, and obviously your interest in the field, that too, right? But the people that you're going to be working with, your mentor, your advisor. So I think those are some things I'll really look into when it comes to choosing which graduate school to go to. But pretty much for me, I'm not really debating whether or not to go to graduate school, but it's more so where and what I want to do. And I think it's also good to be more open to different, I guess, different projects in different directions. Now I'm undergrad, and I think for grad school, I don't necessarily have to stick with batteries or solar cells. It can be something similar, something that's related to these fields, related to energy. So yeah, I think having more options, having my options open is also would be very helpful. So for near future in the summer, I'm going to be also working in Dr. Greer's group at Caltech on 3D printable polymeric electrolytes. So looking at these UV curable electrolytes, definitely really looking forward to that. I think, yeah, looking forward to the project, and generally looking forward to my experience at Caltech, because it's based on my experience in the Young group and Yu Zhang's group. I could already sense, different groups have very different environment, very different group culture. So I think for me, that's really important. And I think before I decide which graduate school to go to, first thing I would look at is just communicating with a graduate student in a group, and then seeing how it's like to work in a group. Yeah.
So thank you so much. And that concludes our panel. So on behalf of the Undergraduate Science Journal, we'd like to thank all four of you for spending your time and sharing your experiences as a scientific writer and a researcher in general. So yeah, so that will conclude our writing panel.